Is Airbnb falling down and how this might affect your investments?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode at NOVARISE. And you heard that right. Today, we're going to talk about what's going on with Airbnb. How is it going to affect your real estate investments? And for that, I know you, Anthony, had a couple of questions for me. So I'm going to let you ask away and just see where this goes.
Yeah, let's go. So let's start with New York. What do you think is happening with Airbnb in New York?
So it's actually interesting because everyone is talking about Airbnb being banned in New York City. But when you look at the rules or the laws, it's like, it's not really banned, right? Like, that's the first thing you say. Well, there's no laws against anything banning Airbnb. But then when you start looking into the requirements to operate an Airbnb in New York City, that's when you realize that, well, I mean, the city might not necessarily be banning Airbnb, but they're making it so difficult that in a way, it is banning Airbnb. That's why you see everywhere in the news the whole phrase about the facto something, which is weird, just another fancy term of saying, I'm going to make things so difficult for you that it will be nearly impossible for you to operate an Airbnb in New York City. So just to give everyone a bit of a context, back in January 2022, there was a rule or a law that was approved that talked about, hey, if you want to operate an Airbnb, you need to get a permit with the state or with the city, right? And, you know, when you hear about something like that, you might think, oh, simple enough. I can actually go and apply for a permit and let it be the end of the story. But for those who don't know, things in New York has been a little bit backwards. You will think that with all the technology that is going on, you will think that the state will be moving forward in terms of, oh, let's upgrade our systems or like let's make everything digitized so that it's easier in our residents to go and actually find something online. No. New York is actually going backwards in every sense of the word. Like if you need something from the city, you are required to send a letter to request something and then wait for their response. I mean, like, what year are we? Like, I mean, let me send a letter asking for a certificate of good standing of my company in New York State, right? So I have to wait for the letter to arrive, or I have to pay an extra fee to have it overnighted, which, by the way, is not cheap. Mm-hmm. And even if it's overnighted and it arrives to whoever's desk, that person might not necessarily get to your letter or to your request right away. That person might be on vacation. That person might be just taking their sweet time getting to your letter. And then by the time they get a response and they decide to send it to you, then you have to wait for like another, I don't know, like 7 to 10 days to get the letter back. Yeah. Or you could pay an expedited fee, like submit a prepaid envelope with an overnighted delivery, which it's going to end up costing you more money. I mean, you see where this is going, right? Yeah. So what does that have to do with Airbnb? It's the same, meaning like if I have to go and apply for a permit in order for me to operate an Airbnb, you can see how painful, difficult, and extensive it's going to be to actually even go and apply. Forget about waiting and receiving that permit. So that was one thing, and that was back in 22. But recently, what the city or the state decided to do is to make it even more difficult. So now, in order for you, the real estate investor, to operate an Airbnb, you need to meet a certain criteria. One, you cannot rent out entire units of Airbnb, meaning that, let's say, for example, if you have an apartment that you want to rent out, you cannot rent out the entire apartment. Or if you bought a multifamily house and you happen to live in one unit and then you will want to rent out the other one or the other two, whichever type of property you have, you can't, because aside from not being able to rent out an entire unit, as a host, you need to be there in the unit.
That's very painful. I mean, imagine you being in the same apartment as someone else.
Yeah, I mean, we typically, when we travel, we usually stay in Airbnbs. I will say 90% of the time we stay in Airbnbs, and I don't want to see the host's face or like having the host watching everything I do and stuff like that. Not that we're doing anything illegal, but it's just we want privacy. Like that's you're paying for privacy. Why do you want to see someone else in there.
Yeah, but it's very interesting because Airbnb, the entire mojo of Airbnb is that the reason why they have hosts is because supposedly they wanted to mimic like a very local experience, meaning that you go to a location and you'll be greeted by the host, and the host, hopefully you can make a connection with the host, and the host will take you out, like engage with the host, so probably get to know the culture.
I mean, if the host is providing those type of services, yes. I mean, and if the person who's renting wants that.
Yeah.
But more often than not, people just want a play.
Convenience.
Yeah, they just want the convenience. Like, for example, in our case, yeah, like sometimes it is actually more affordable to get an Airbnb than a hotel. Well, not sometimes. The majority of the time, at least in our case, it was a lot more cost effective to get an Airbnb than to go into a hotel.
Yep.
Second, I like my food to be homemade for the most part. Like, not all the time, but at least I want my breakfast to be homemade. Like, I don't want to have to go out and eat some sandwich. No, I want to make my own eggs. I want to make my own shake. And that's something that a hotel room usually cannot provide unless you bring your own shaker or your own, I don't know, mini electric oven that you can hook up in the hotel room to cook. That's usually not the case. So there are certain things that hotels are not going to be able to fulfill. Yes, you can rent out a suite in a hotel, but not all hotels have suites. That's why people tend to go to Airbnb. It's also an inconvenience. For example, for families who have children, they don't want a stranger like in the apartment or in the house, with their children. People are very, protective of their family, especially if they have little ones around. And yeah, the host might be nice, but at the end of the day, you don't know who they are. And so it's just interesting to see how this is going to break down, right? So back to what we were talking about originally, yeah, the state didn't necessarily say, hey, Airbnb is banned. However, you need to fulfill all those requisites in order to be able to operate your Airbnb legally. Otherwise, you're going to be fined thousands of dollars, which makes it very difficult for people to comply with that. And for those who have multiple Airbnbs, then you're kind of like forced to just wind down your portfolio back to one, because as a host, you cannot be in multiple places at the same time.
It's crazy.
Yep.
It's crazy. But I mean, the positive side of this new rules that are happening for Airbnbs, I think, is that it creates a new barrier of entry. So that means that you might not have a lot of hosts competing with you, and you can also charge a little bit more of money for your rental.
Yeah, I mean, that's one possibility, but let's see what really happens, because as far as I'm concerned, every time a rule or a law gets approved, there's always an exception to the rule, right? Which we were actually talking about that in terms of the hotels, right?
So now I have another question for you, and this is regarding other platforms, because I know Airbnb is just one piece of the puzzle, but you also have Vrbo, you have hotels, which are also short-term rental. What do you think is going to happen to them?
I think that, I mean, it's too soon to tell, but in my experience, every time they approve a law or some kind of rule, there's always an exception to the rule. So we have to wait and see what else happened. But as far as I'm concerned, not everyone, it's going to get banned. Like, yes, I know we talk a lot about Airbnb, but the law was actually passed for all short-term rentals, right? So Airbnb is not the only short-term rental platform that exists. Hotels, in fact, are short-term rentals, right? Anything that's under 30 days, it's considered short-term. And so in the case of hotels, they actually have an assumption that they need to apply for. And that means that they're exempt from being forbidden or from having to go through all those crazy requisites in order to operate. And if you come to think about it, like, the hotel business is a little bit different. Well, not a little, it's very different from an Airbnb, because one, they have been around longer than Airbnbs, and two, they pay a lot of taxes. So I'm sure the state is not stupid to go after or crack down on hotels.
They're paying a lot more money.
Yeah, because they're going to lose on revenue. And not just that, hotels create jobs as well. They have to hire a lot of personnel, anything from cleaning, maintenance stuff, even customer service, and even for their booking services. So they hire many more people than an Airbnb does. And in terms of Verbo, with Verbo is a little bit interesting because Verbo is not like an Airbnb per se, meaning, yes, they do have a platform where they provide short-term rentals, but Verbo is actually owned by Expedia. And Expedia is a travel company. I'm sure they make money. They make a lot more money through their other services of bookings, anything from booking a flight or car rental, hotel room. So like it's not like Verbo needs the host of their short-term rentals the way Airbnb does. So again, it's very interesting. Let's just see how things are going to play out. But again, just like they came up with the exception to the rule for hotels, I am sure someone's going to come up with something that's going to bypass or create a layer to not do anything that is illegal, meaning be able to still operate in spite of those laws and still comply with the law and continue to have your Airbnb portfolio. Who knows?
And now, why do you think they're doing this? Like all of a sudden, they just want to crack down on short-term rentals. What's your opinion on that?
I mean, the argument that New York City has is that there's no affordable housing anymore because the cost of living in New York City has gotten up tremendously. And personally, I think that's BS. I mean, New York City has always been expensive as far as I'm concerned. Even before the existence of Airbnb, New York City was already unaffordable in a way. I mean, there's a reason why the TV show Friends showcase people living together as roommates because
Five people in one apartment?
Five people hanging out, but like two adults and way into their 30s still having roommates because it's just ridiculously expensive to live in New York City. So, I mean, I don't think that New York City now is impossible to afford because of Airbnb. New York City, it's impossible to afford because, let's face it, everybody wants to come to New York City. It's the mecca of, anyone who wants to make it strong, and like anyone who's competitive and want to make money in here. So, I mean, getting rid of Airbnb is not necessarily gonna make the landlords reconsider and say, oh, let me lower the rent. They might take their property off Airbnb if business is too difficult, but they're going to still put their property up for market rent. They're not going to lower it. The only times where I have seen the rent in New York City go down, it's when something extreme happens. Like, I don't know, another 9/11 terrorist attack or another pandemic where people wanted to leave. In fact, we actually know a lot of people who managed to score great apartments in areas where they thought they would never be able to afford it because of that. Because a lot of people, I guess they overreacted to the whole pandemic thing. They moved out of New York City. They went to other states looking for bigger properties. And the properties were sitting vacant for quite a few months in New York City, and landlords were actually forced to lower that rent. But that's a very extreme case. And all the years that I've been in New York City, I've only seen the rent go down in those instances. So once again, eliminating Airbnb is not going to make New York City more affordable. I think that's a joke. And in fact, the argument that Airbnb has against the city is that, like, getting rid of us is not going to make New York City more affordable. And in fact, getting rid of us can hurt the tourism in New York City because, like we talked about, a lot of people seek out for Airbnbs just because sometimes they cannot afford a hotel rate here in the city.
Or simply they like to do what we like to do. Sometimes we like to rent Airbnb so we can go and experience the layout of a house. We can just go and relax in a different environment rather than just going to like a hotel, which is the same cookie cutter layout for most of the rooms.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just let's see what happens. It's hard to tell, but I personally don't think the rents are going to get cheaper anytime soon, especially with the influx of people. We are getting more and more people coming to New York City, whether it's from other states or even internationally. So housing is going to be even more challenging.
Now that, let's say, a lot of people will not list their places in Airbnb, do you think people who work like around New York City, they want to move in a little bit closer to New York City so they can probably don't have to commute as much, like 2 hours, 3 hours? So in a way, there is more apartments for or like living spaces where these people can move in and just shorten their commute.
I mean, that's a very difficult question to answer because for some families, commuting time, it's a big major decision on choosing where they want to live. But for some others, it's not. Some people, maybe they value having more space because they don't have to commute to the office so often. So even if that availability of a place closer to work, it might not necessarily provoke people from wanting to move in. Or if you are a household that have children and you happen to be in a very school district, so parents tend to want to make the sacrifice of commuting a longer time in exchange of their children having better access to better schools. So yes and no. I guess your question came more from your personal perspective because you value your time a lot more. And for you, commuting longer might not necessarily be an ideal. But who will see? Because even if it's more accessible to work in terms of commuting time, there's still the factor is going to be more accessible in terms of money. If you cannot afford it, so what if it's available? You cannot pay it. Yeah.
Yep. Valid points. Now, the question is this something that's just happening in your city, or how many other states will be affected by these new regulations, laws for short-term rentals?
Well, in fact, I have an article right here. So according to what I read, New York City is not the only metropolis to crack down on Airbnbs within the U.S. In fact, actually, the same thing is happening in L.A., and LA is actually the city with the most Airbnbs in the U.S., for those who didn't know. Southern California is also cracking down on Airbnbs. They began enforcing what they call a home sharing ordinance, requiring hosts to register with the city and guests to pay tourist tax fees. So not only you have to register with the city, but you also have to pay an additional tax in order to operate an Airbnb in Southern California. And in addition to that, San Francisco, it's requiring that short-term rental hosts are certified by the city. I'm not sure if being certified is the same thing as asking for a permit. I don't know. Maybe you need to take a test in order to get certified. Who knows? And in addition to that, you have to live in the property for at least 275 days a year.
That's a long time.
Yeah. I mean, back to what we're saying, do you want to hang out with a host when you rent your Airbnb?
I don't know. Who knows? Maybe there is a strategy behind that. Maybe you can hire someone to stay there on your behalf. Could be the handyman. Maybe. I don't know if that's going to work though. Because I know that's maybe some strategies that you can apply. Maybe it's something that you can start thinking about.
I mean, it's true. Like I said, when a law is passed, there's usually some exception that you can implement. Mm-hmm. And even if there are no exceptions, I'm sure people are smart enough to figure something out. In fact, we actually learned this strategy from our attorneys, and where there was a crackdown once again against Airbnbs years ago, and where leases or contracts, depending on the type of property that you purchase, call it a condo or call it a house, and where some states were stating that if you are buying an investment property, mm-hmm. that you cannot put it for short-term rental, that you're only allowed to do long-term rentals in it. So what a lot of attorneys started suggesting, and then people started doing it, of course, is that they will create a two-step process, meaning let's say you buy a property in one of those states and where you're not allowed to do short-term rental. So what you will do is that you will create a lease with a property management company and you will rent out your property for a full year or two, right? So there you are respecting the law. You're not violating anything. You are doing your 1 to 2 year lease, right? Then your property management company is going to do the Airbnb thing for you. So it's kind of like an additional step. you're still able to do
Yeah.
Airbnb, you're just not doing it directly. So I am pretty sure something like that's going to happen in the event that we don't have an exception to the rule.
So it looks like all these regulations are put in place to protect the tenant. And this reminds me of a case, and I have my article right here in LA, where someone stood in a property for 540 days. And it's not like they were paying rent for that. Can you talk to me about that article?
Yeah, that's actually quite interesting because to your point, a lot of these rules apparently are meant to protect the tenant, and some take advantage of the situation. For those who don't know, or for those who have been following us for quite some time, every time somebody asks the question, what are the best places to invest in? I don't necessarily say specifically where to invest, but one thing I do say is if you are looking for a place and where you want to have an investment property and put it up for rent, if that is your strategy, you should actually pick those states and where they have laws that are more landlord friendly as opposed to tenant friendly. So New York City and LA have tenant friendly laws. That's why all of this is happening in New York City, because they're meant to protect more and more tenants. And in LA, the complete opposite happened. Yes, so they created all of these set of rules to help protect the tenants, but some people do take advantage, like this woman that appeared in the article of the LA Times.
Yeah.
And so I think that what happened was that this person rented an Airbnb for 2 days or 3 days. I'm not entirely sure. But long story short, this person rented out the Airbnb for only a few days and then decided to stay there for over a year without paying anything. So the landlord of the Airbnb has tried anything within her power, has used attorneys, whatever, to try to evict this person. And she hasn't been successful. And the irony of the situation, it's not the fact that this person rented an Airbnb for a few days and decided to stay there long term, is that she picked an expensive Airbnb. It wasn't just any Airbnb. We're talking about a luxurious place. And on top of that,
Just to get compensated.
to make it even outrageous, this person is suing the landlord, and on top of that,
$1,000.
is demanding $100,000 and relocation fees. Like, hey, if you want me to move out, you have to pay for me to move out, but you have to give me $100,000. And you and I have moved quite a few times, and you do not need $100,000 to move, right?
Yep.
But yeah, it's just the irony of things. It involves an Airbnb, involves tenants, involves tenant law protection. So always be on the lookout. That's not to say that it is bad to do business in LA or New York City, but it's just something for you to keep in mind of additional hurdles that you might have to overcome in order to run a successful business.
So now these laws are happening all the time, and the only thing that we can do is just adjust and become better investors.
Yeah, I mean, laws are always going to keep coming, and let's just face it, like everyone wants money at the end of the day. If they see that a certain business is being successful, the government always wants a piece of it, right? They always want to charge more taxes. And just like with every law, there will always going to be a caveat. There's always going to be an exception, and there always going to be another great idea like the one we just talked about the whole long-term, short-term extra step. And I guess all we have left to do is just to continue monitoring the market and adjust and be better.
So now if you're being affected by these laws and you're finding ways and to work around it, become a better investor.
Yeah.
Like I said, share your comments down below.
To help this beautiful community, everyone is tuning in to learn tips, and there's tips that the communities can learn, and also we can learn from you as well. So looking forward to your comments down below, and we'll see you in the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. See ya.